Okay, so now that we've kind of set up this template, and you can see this is the architecture template. I've just created a new project with the architectural template. Now that we've moved these sort of things out of the way, we've got plenty of space to create our project, and we won't run into any issues with our elevations or anything like that. So what I tend to start with, because I have so much space here to work with, my project's probably not going to be 2,000 feet long. So I'm going to just draw a small little box here so I know this is essentially the center of all of these elevation kind of waypoint finders. And then I'm going to select one of them, right click, hit hide in view, hide category. So now these are gone. If I ever want to bring them back up, I can hit this reveal hidden elements down here, and it'll show this big red box of, okay, you're looking at hidden stuff, and anything that's hidden shows up in red, so I can find those again if I need to. But when I turn those off, now if I double click my scroll wheel, I zoom in on the box that I just created. So now it zooms to the extent of my project. So I can delete that and we'll start clean. Okay, so first things first, we're going to kind of go through the user interface here a little bit. That way you guys have a general understanding of where things are and kind of how things are laid out here in Revit. So along the left hand side, you may show something that just looks like this. So this is your project browser. This is how you kind of get around between views in Revit. So right now I'm on my level 1 floor plan. If I double click level 2, it'll take me to my level 2 floor plan, site plan, there's ceiling plans already created, and then your 4 elevations that are the little markers that we moved out of the way and just hit. Other items that are on here, legends, these are all things, they do not have anything built into them just yet, but as you go through a project and create new ones, these will then populate with the new things that you've created. The families tab, if I drop that down, it shows all of the families that are basically already loaded in here. So furniture, I show a desk. If I go under components, you can see I have a little desk here. It looks like a rectangle right now, but if I go to my 3D view, there's a desk. So a good way, you might notice that I'm kind of flipping back and forth between views here. A way that you can kind of navigate around, let's say I just draw a couple walls here. So I'm in the level 2 floor plan right now. So I've got a couple walls drawn here in level 2 floor plan. And if you see, I double click my scroll wheel and it jumped way out because of these. On the level 2 plan, I'm going to hide that category as well. So now when I double click my scroll wheel, I jump into where my building model is. But if I go to my 3D view, now I can see where these walls are. If I hold shift down and click my scroll wheel in, I can orbit around this thing and kind of see certain things. As your model gets bigger, it's going to be more difficult to kind of orbit around and see exactly what you want. If you select an item and then orbit, you orbit around that item. That becomes your center point, which can be handy when your model is huge and you just want to kind of get around this one little piece. You can select it and then orbit around that particular item. So that can be handy at times. So now that I'm in my 3D view, if I want to jump back to level 2, I can either double click on level 2 and jump back here. I can come up here and show this little restore down. It's almost like working, these are all the windows that I have open, almost like working just in your Windows kind of browser. So if you have multiple windows open, you can kind of minimize those a little bit and then see all of the things you have open. But this is kind of a clunky way to work, to see all of these things here and try to orient them so that you can see them all at once. You don't get near as much within your view. So if I maximize that again, any views that I have already opened, I can cycle through those instead of going through up here or coming over here. Sometimes a quick way to get back and forth between views, it'll cycle through views. If you hit Control Tab, now I just jump back to level 2 because that was the last view that I was at. If I hit Control Tab again, now I'm back to level 1. Control Tab again, now I'm back to my 3D view. Those are the 3 views that I have open right now, and I can hit Control Tab and cycle through those pretty quickly without coming back over here. So that's an easy way to kind of get around pretty quickly between all of the views that you have. If your model gets a little slow, and you've been working on it for a while, odds are you have a bunch of views open that you've been working in. If you come up here to View and hit Close Hidden, it'll close all of the views except for the one that you're currently working in. And sometimes that's a good idea to just come up here and close all the hidden ones. That way you can kind of work a little bit more efficiently in whatever view you're working in, if your model gets a little bogged down. So that being said, let's get rid of our walls here. So this is your project browser, basically how you get around in the program, along with a few other ways that I just showed. Another thing that you will need, probably more than your project browser even, if you right click and come down here and hit Properties, you can open up this Properties window. Now this Properties window basically shows you the different aspects to whatever you have selected. If you have nothing selected, it will show you the properties of the view that you're in. So I'm in level 1. These are all the properties of that particular view, which we will kind of go through all of those here in a little bit. But in terms of just the general use of this, these are your view specific views here. If I hit Edit Type, this opens up another type of kind of properties window. So anything that is under just properties is specific to that item or that view. So all the 1/8 inch equals a foot, that is just for level 1. Display mode, detail level, parts visibility, all of that stuff is specific to level 1. If I go under Edit Type, this stuff is specific to all floor plan views. So what does the call tag look like, the reference label, view template applied to new views. So if I were to create a new floor plan, I can click on this and any new floor plan views have that view template automatically applied. The way you can sort of, if you need a helpful way to remind yourself of whether these impact the general idea of floor plans or specifically to level 1, you can look here and under type it just says floor plan, whereas over here it says floor plan level 1. So it's giving you a more specific name over here than it is over here. So these things apply to floor plans, these things apply to level 1 floor plan. So that's an easy way to kind of differentiate between edit type properties and just properties. If you're familiar with AutoCAD, this is set up in a similar fashion to AutoCAD, where you have this ribbon across the top that has a couple different tabs on it, and a lot of your modeling tools are built up into this ribbon here. So the architecture tab is mostly your 3D model components. Anything you build using the architecture tab for the most part is going to show up in all views. So just like I created those walls earlier and then jumped to the 3D view, you could then see the walls there. If I create a door, a window, put in a component, columns, roofs, ceilings, floors, all of that stuff, I draw in one view, it's going to show up in another view. These room tags and that sort of stuff, all of these are things that kind of correspond to how these things interact together. So if I draw a rectangular room here and I go to room, I can place a room within here and then label that space. Then room separators are similar. You can draw divisions within an open space. So if I want to designate that space different from the rest, I can kind of highlight that and designate those as two different spaces. That can be handy when you have an open style floor plan and you need to kind of show a division between those two areas. And then you can tag your rooms similarly. So I didn't place any rooms, so let's say I place a room there and then I tag this room. When I hover over it, it's going to show this tag. This is an enormous tag. Any annotations or tags, that sort of stuff, is based on your scale. So all of your annotations and tags are going to stay readable. So there's a certain level of text to this. If you open this family up under Edit Family and select the text, it'll show you what size that stuff shows up as. But you can see how this is huge. That's because this isn't that big of a room. It's only 7 foot by, say, 5 foot. And I'm at 1/8 inch scale. So this is going to print really small, but I want to still be able to read my room tag. But if I move this up to 1/2 inch equals a foot, now my room tags start to read a little bit more clearly. If you start to get into issues where your room tags are enormous, you may want to look at doing your floor plans that have tags in them at a larger scale and then break them down instead of one huge floor plan that doesn't that wouldn't fit on a sheet with the annotations at the correct scale. You may want to break your floor plan into maybe 2 sheets or something like that. That way you don't run into issues where your room tags are bigger than the room itself, kind of thing. So that's basically the architecture tab here. There's also openings, that sort of stuff. If I click wall, I can select the wall and then click and drag and draw an opening in that wall. That's all stuff that we'll get into kind of as we go through and model different aspects. Work planes we'll also get into a little bit later. Structure, these are elements that are recognized as specifically structural elements by Revit. So if you ever did an analysis that involves structural beams, structural walls, you can also filter by structural elements. So if you wanted to say you built your entire structural element that had bracing, beams, columns, that sort of stuff, and then pretty much the skin of your model was a curtain wall, you could go through, hide pretty much everything but your structural elements and see just a 3D view of the structure of your building. If that's a view that you think you're going to need in the future, go ahead and put that stuff in. Most times I don't really deal with this sort of stuff all that often. You either have a structural consultant that is building all of that into their model, and then you're linking, you'll link that Revit model in on top of yours, or I'm creating the structure myself and I'm not going to need just a structural view, and I'll create those using columns and other different elements here. Things that I might use in here are beams and that sort of stuff, but for the most part that sort of stuff doesn't really come into play if you're just doing the architectural side of things. But you'll still need to know kind of how this stuff kind of interacts so you can talk intelligently about that sort of stuff with your structural engineer. And if you're doing a small project on your own, you'll need to be able to calculate, what exactly you'll need here. So systems is similar to the structures tab. It's not very often that your architect or even if you're just the architect on the project, it's not very often you're going to be putting in the flex ducts, the fittings and pipes and all of that stuff within your model. It starts to get pretty heavy if you start to put all of this stuff plus your structure plus your architecture all in the same model. If you really wanted to get into that sort of stuff, I would recommend creating a new file and then linking that stuff in so it doesn't bog your model down too much. That way you have separate files that this stuff is built into. Insert tab is just what it sounds like. You can link Revit files, link CAD files, import decals. You can just import a CAD versus link a CAD. If you link a CAD, when you save and update that CAD file elsewhere, it'll automatically update within your Revit model. When you open the Revit model again, it'll have the newest version of that. You can insert files here and also import images and that sort of stuff. You can also just come in and load families here if you need to. This Autodesk Seek, they have models and drawings and specs and stuff of different products already made. Some of them are okay. Most of them are just mediocre. it's not the best place to find good models to use, but we'll eventually get into where you can find some of that stuff. Under the Annotate tab, this is all the two-dimensional and also view-specific stuff. So let's say I wanted to do a dimension. I'll dimension these walls here, and then I'm going to draw a detail line that maybe shows me some sort of element here in the corner, just in this specific view. So now that I've created these things in this view, if I go to my 3D view, none of that stuff is going to show up. You only see the room separation line. You don't see that curve I just made or the dimensions that I made. So all of that stuff is just view specific. Even on level 2, if I go to level 2, I'm not seeing any of that stuff there either. So that is all the stuff on the Annotate tab is specific to this view. You can also see room tags and stuff like that are in here as well. That sort of stuff is also view specific. You've got symbols, you can show span directions, area symbols, all of that stuff, keynotes, all of that tagging and sort of annotations, obviously under the Annotate tab. There's also fill regions, so if you have a certain spot that you want to show a different hatch pattern or something like that, you can create a fill region. There's also the masking region if for whatever reason you're having really hard time with an element and it's not looking quite right. So maybe this wall joint is looking kind of goofy for whatever reason and you want to clean it up, and it just will not cooperate with you any other way. You can come in and do a masking region over the top of it and kind of hide that, and then kind of sketch over the top of it. The Analyze tab, this is getting into kind of spaces, zones, all of these different kind of aspects that come into analyzing your model. You can also create an energy model, run energy simulations, that sort of stuff is all under the Analyze tab. The energy simulations, I would use them sparingly. They are not super accurate. There are more robust programs than what is built into Revit to create an energy model that is far more accurate than what you'll get out of this. If you're just doing preliminary analysis of a massing and you want to see if I rotate this about 10 degrees, how badly does that impact my solar gains and that sort of stuff, then you can start to use it for things like that where you get a general sense of the impact of some large-scale moves that you're trying to make. So use it for stuff like that. Otherwise, I would kind of steer you more towards some other programs that are a little bit more adept and built specifically for energy analysis. Space separators, space zones, this is similar to kind of the rooms idea. So rooms are essentially just a 2D element, so this shows this sort of thing, but it can also calculate volume if you want it to. But spaces do take into account volume. So if you went through and tagged all of your spaces and then created a schedule based on space, I know a lot of people get into things like Passive House, Living Building Challenge, things like that that are kind of robust sustainability standards. When you do your calculations, you will need to know volumes of spaces so they know kind of the heating and cooling requirements of the entire building. If you were to label things as spaces and also kind of create a schedule of those, you can create a schedule by space and also show the volume of each individual space. So you have basically a giant chart that is your master key when you're doing the analysis for those sustainability standards and that sort of thing. So that can be useful if you need to. You can also create different zones. So if you're creating if you have an overall plan and you want to show let's say you wanted to show a HVAC contractor how you want to zone a project, you can show I want on one furnace I want this particular area, on another I want this air handling unit to handle this space over here. you can zone that and show that within that particular view. Massing in site, just what it sounds like. You can create topo surfaces and that sort of stuff, show property lines, you can show grades and building pads, all of that sort of stuff. There's also this massing tool where you can start to push, pull. It's essentially similar to kind of a SketchUp. When you first use it, if you're going into it thinking, oh, it works exactly like SketchUp, you're going to be a little disappointed because it does not work exactly like SketchUp. It's a little bit more clunky. However, it's not so clunky that you should be working in SketchUp first and then coming in here. This will essentially eliminate the SketchUp altogether, just from the standpoint of if you have a mass already in Revit, it's really easy to transfer into a working project, as opposed to if you create something in SketchUp and you try to import it in here, it's going to be, it tends to be a little bit of a pain. It's a little bit harder to work with. It's not native to the program, so you're going to encounter some problems there. So when at all possible, if you know you're going to be doing your construction documents in Revit, start your massing in Revit. It just makes sense. You don't have to deal with another program or anything like that. So that's what the massing tool can be used for. It can be useful at times. Collaborate. This is if you're working on a big project or with multiple people. You save what is considered a central file, and then everybody works off of that central file and loads back into it. And that way you can have multiple people working in the same file at one time. Firms use this slightly differently, so as you get into it, you can kind of go from there. Views. This is where you create any sort of new views, section views, 3D views, camera views, walkthroughs, elevations. All of that stuff is built in here. Sheets is also here. You can also view any view templates that you've created from there, and also create filters and that sort of thing. Also under views, under user interface down here, there's also the keyboard shortcuts. You can click this and it'll pull up what the default keyboard shortcuts are. As you kind of use tools more often, you can come in here and create your own. So you just come in here, select the item you want, punch in the two keys that you want to be the hotkey. So select links. Let's say you want it to be SL. So I'll hit SL and then hit assign, and now SL is the hotkey for select links. So you can go through and do that and create your own keyboard shortcuts if you'd like. Manage. This is kind of your overall project stuff. So creating materials, any snaps you'd like to use, project information. You can put in like your company name, any descriptions, building name, your name if you're the only one working in this model, issue dates, client name. All of that stuff can be built into the model, so you can have your project information already in there. Parameters we'll get into a little bit later when we get into families and that sort of stuff. So there's the purge unused that I talked about previously in the other one. Project units, you can change your project units in here from length. You can change this from feet and fractional inches to decimal inches, fractional inches, meters, decimeters. All that stuff is built in here. So if you want to change what your format is, you can come in here and change all of that. That's just for length. They also have area, volume, all of that stuff that you can change. The MEP settings, all of that stuff, that's basically for the systems tab. Additional settings, these are your fill patterns, all of the stuff that is already built in, line weights, line styles, line patterns. These are all things that, depending on your personal preferences, you can come in here and change the settings for a lot of this stuff. So like line patterns, here's all your different line patterns. If I wanted to change the aligning line idea, this shows kind of how that one works. There's a dash that's an 1/8 inch long, then there's a space with an 1/8 inch, and then if there's nothing after that, it's just going to go back to the first one. So it goes dash 1/8 inch, space 1/8 inch, dash 1/8 inch, space 1/8 inch. So that's essentially how this works. you can kind of come through and see all of the different line styles. If you want to create a new one, you can come in here and create a new one off of that. So that's also under additional settings. Line weights. Revit does line weights slightly differently from AutoCAD in that your line weight is based on your scale. So these have some common scales built in here, and then it shows a line weight of 1, what the thickness is, line weight of 2, what the thickness is. So as your scale goes higher, the thickness of the line gets a little bit heavier. That way it kind of shows up a little bit better, a little bit bolder in the larger scales. If you use a scale that is not built in here, you can add a scale and then adjust those accordingly. All of this stuff is stuff that can be adjusted, so you can come in here and say, I want line weight of 1. This smallest line weight isn't thin enough for me. I want it to be a little bit thinner. Okay, great. I rarely see people go all the way up to 16 different line weights. That gets a little crazy. If you try to use 16 different line weights, I don't know that you'll notice the difference between half of them, just as you're glancing at the file. So that's something that you can, based on your own personal preferences, build a model first, print it out, see how it looks. If you don't like the way your walls are showing up, you can come in here. We can look at the settings of what the walls are set at, and you can start to adjust kind of how these are working in your model and get it to look the way that you want. Once you find a setting that you like and works pretty well for you, I would build this into your template. So I would open up that architecture template again, adjust those accordingly to whatever you think is going to look great, and then it's always there. Your line styles and line weights are all set up. Anything else under here? This is all stuff that we'll kind of get into within other kind of things. So now location, coordinates, that sort of stuff, you can basically set the location of your project. So specify geographic location for you basically pull up essentially a Google map and drag your project location tag into it. Then when you do renderings and that sort of thing, it knows the project location. You can set time of day. It'll render according to sun's location on that time and date and all of that sort of stuff. Position, you can rotate, mirror the entire project if you want to, rotate where project north is, and true north. So true north, if you want the difference between true north and project north. So project north would be like built into this project, I want north to be like up. But if true north is 10 degrees off of that, I can rotate true north without getting into a problem where all of my sheets have my model rotated at 10 degrees off and don't really fit the sheet real well since the sheet's rectangular. I want this to sit just like this. I don't want this to sit like that on my sheet. So I would make true north off 10 degrees, but project north would be right back to straight up and down. So you can set that stuff up accordingly. The direction of true north comes into play with your renderings and that sort of stuff based on your location. Design options, you can do design options that'll show different aspects, like a couple different ideas, and you can scroll through those real quick. So let's say I wanted to create a design option, we'll say a new set, and I'll do, so under the new primary option, I'm going to hit edit selected, and I'm going to close this out real quick, and see how this grayed out. I can no longer grab those walls because that's part of the main model. Now that I'm in this design set, I'm going to say, okay, I want to see what something like this is going to look like in my model. And say, okay, got that one. Now I'm going to go to option 2, edit that selected one. Now it got rid of option 1, so now I can come back in here and say, okay, now I want to see what this one looks like. And now that I have that, if I go under my design options, I can hit finish editing. Since this is my primary, it's going to default to that. If I go to option 2, I can hit make this primary, and it's going to jump to this. It's going to show that the relationship between these things is a little goofy, but that's fine. Once we decide which one we want, we can create as many of these as we want. Whatever one we want to select at the very end, I'll say, okay, I want to make that my primary, and this is the one I want to use from now on. So as soon as I make that my primary, and say close, now I've got this pretty much set up exactly how I want. If I go in here and say, if I select option set 1, and I've decided this is the one I want, I do not need option 2 anymore, I hit accept primary, and it says, yeah, I'm going to delete the secondary options. Yes, okay. Now it eliminates those design options, and now this is in the main model now. So that can be useful if you're trying to work out some ideas. Phases we'll get into here in a little bit. Select by ID. If you know something's ID number, you can punch it in and it'll find that element. This can be really useful for when you get error messages. If you get an error message, it'll give you the ID of the thing that's causing the problem. You can jot it down, select by ID, and hit show, and it'll find that element for you. Add-ins and extensions, we're not going to go over much of that. If you have an add-in or an extension that you want to use, I'm sure you can find plenty of other places to walk you through those. Modify is your standard sort of manipulation tools, so offset, align, move, copy, rotation, mirror, trim, scaling stuff, arraying stuff, that sort of thing is all built within the Modify tab. So that is a general overview of the ribbon and the properties. Down here at the bottom, you can change the scale of your view. So this is showing you what scale you're at. I can change this back and forth between different things here. Your detail level, coarse versus fine. Let's draw a wall that'll show the difference here. So let's say we draw a brick wall here. Okay, so if I go to a coarse view. So you see how this shows just a general, really basic kind of view of this wall. If I then make it fine, now I see all of the layers of that wall. I get my brick, I get my air gap, I get my sheathing, I get studs, and I get gypsum board on the inside. So you can kind of cycle through these and see the difference between the coarse, the fine, and that sort of thing. Depending on what view you want, what you're after, whether you want to show this amount of detail or not, you can scroll through those and set those up within view templates and that sort of thing. Next is your graphic display. So wireframe, hidden line, shaded, that sort of stuff. This will probably be easier to see in a view like this. So let's rotate around here. Okay, so this is hidden line. So hidden line is kind of your stock view, black and white, shows you kind of what you need to see different places. Wireframe is exactly what it sounds like. It makes everything transparent. You see the outlines of everything, but you know, it gets a little hectic in 3D view to try to work in wireframe mode. It can be very nice to work in a plan view in wireframe, because if something's being covered up, you want to be able to snap to it. You can throw it in wireframe, grab the point you're at, and then kind of go from there. Shaded view. So all of this stuff is gray right now. This one is showing the red, kind of generic brick look. Shaded view, when we get into materials, you'll see you can define what the shaded color is. So this one, for the brick material, it's just a red. This is kind of a whitish gray. And then these are just default material right now, so they're just a kind of medium gray color. Consistent colors are kind of similar to the shade view. I'm not sure when you would use consistent colors. I've never found a real great reason to use it. Shaded is usually a little bit better. It kind of defines the edges a little bit more. I guess if you have view issues where this is getting too dark and you can't see what's going on there, you can use consistent colors and it won't show that kind of shadow as you kind of turn the corner there. Realistic view, it's going to do its best job of showing what this is going to look like rendered. So this is the image pattern that is shown on that, as is this. So when you render it, this is essentially what that's going to look like. It may have a little bit more texture, a little bit more realism when you render it, as opposed to the realistic view. But the realistic view also still keeps the black line along the edges, whereas when you render it, it will eliminate that. And then ray trace, I would never really use ray trace unless you have a really high-end computer. It tries to compute your sun and that sort of stuff and render this in real time. So now this is essentially a rendered view. I can orbit around and see this takes up quite a bit of space, and you can see it's also a little laggy in terms of computing stuff. If you have a model bigger than this, it gets really clunky. So I would pretty much stay on your realistic view if you want to kind of get a general idea there. Sun settings, we'll get into all of the sun settings and renders and stuff like that once we get into kind of the rendering section of things. Crop regions and that sort of stuff. So if I go to level 1 and I hit show crop region, this is basically where this view is cropped at. If I pull this in, I can basically consolidate this view down to whatever I want it to be. If I say do not crop, it still shows the crop region, but it's no longer creating that boundary. So as I turn this on and off, it'll crop and not crop. If I don't want to see this boundary, I can click on this little hide crop region and that goes away. Temporary hide, isolate, and reveal hidden elements. You can click on something and this will hide items. You can also do the right click, hide elements category by filter, that sort of stuff. You can also do that here. That's essentially the same as this. Anything that I do hide, so let's say I hide this wall here. If I want to bring it back, I can hit this little light bulb. It shows the red around, and then anything that is hidden is in red. I can select that wall, hit unhide, and now it goes to gray again. And if I turn this back off, now my wall is back. Other things that are down here, there's analytical models, constraints, that sort of stuff. Constraints we'll get into a little bit later. Temporary view properties. So you can apply view templates temporarily if you want to. When we get into project setup, I'll show you kind of a better way of working with that I found that I like a little bit better, so that you always have a clean view and then you always have kind of a working view. So that is your general overview of kind of how Revit is laid out.